Maybe this is, I don't know, shoot, is this too controversial? You can decide whether you want to keep it.
Welcome to Frameworks for Growth. I'm Christina Cacioppo, co-founder and CEO of Vanta, and I'm here today with Garry Tan, president and CEO of Y Combinator. Garry, you've started several companies. You started a venture firm called Initialized. You started a YouTube channel. You've started a movement around San Francisco politics, at least unofficially. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Kicking things off, YC's seen several cycles of booms and busts. This feels like a little boom-timey, but what feels different about now than the past?
The obvious answer is AI, and the wildest thing is how much growth is happening in startup land and how much growth can happen with really super young teams that basically are starting out with nothing. And they can go from really zero to $10 million a year in revenue, sometimes in the course of less than 12 months, and they can do it with less than 10 people. It's really sort of astonishing. You know, the last 3 batches of YC have done this insane thing that we've never seen before. In the past, 2009 for Airbnb, the best company of a generation, they were able to grow 10% week on week. The last 3 batches in aggregate, on average, have grown their revenue 10% week on week. I think when you went through YC, what was your demo day goal?
Seared into my soul. It was 180K, 0 to 180K in 10 weeks.
Which is incredible, and you nailed it.
We did. Yes.
Which is, turns out quite predictive of what ends up happening with the business. These days, a lot of the companies are getting to $500,000 and sometimes in rare scenarios, $1 million a year in the course of 10 or 12 weeks, which is astonishing, has never happened before. It used to be the Vanta of the batch or the Airbnb of the batch would hit their goal and hit 10% week on week. And so AI is here, it's here to stay, and it's really wild.
So in this age of abundance for founders, what's one thing you try to impress upon them in the 10 weeks? Or maybe beyond, to call it the first 6 months, but the YC part and immediately afterward.
I think if you run the retrospective on startups, period, number one, by far and away, the reason why the startup doesn't work is they don't make something people want. Mm-hmm. And so either they make the wrong thing or they don't make anything at all. The median startup, they just aren't that capable at building, which is that's sad. And that's going away. Instead of having the technology get in the way or, we just couldn't get the servers up or whatever it was. Now you can vibe code your way there. So
I saw that from Andre's tweets about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And vibe coding is a thing. That means a quarter of the current Y Combinator batch is vibe coding their way to ideally product market fit, making something that people actually want. So the reasons for failure are going down. So in theory, what that means is the ability to be successful is no longer limited by technical ability. The only thing that's at sort of the limit is can the founders get in the heads of customers and understand what they need and then create something that actually, solves a problem, and will they pay for it?
And so in that, are you seeing more pivots? Are they do they feel like pivots because it sounds like they're happening faster? Any good pivot stories from more recent YC batches?
The most common types of pivots are actually people going from things they feel like they should do, like things that sound like startups, to things that they intimately know personally. One of my favorite ones recently is a company called Data Curve. They came into YC doing something wildly different. I think it was sort of a little bit undifferentiated AI workflow. And then they pivoted to AI for PM software. When they really looked down, they realized, actually, we haven't worked as PMs at software companies yet. So, we could meet PMs, but, we're not going to understand the role intimately enough to actually build software for those people. And then one of them was an intern at one of the top AI labs. And so they turned around and took the thing that they were working on that summer, just the last summer, and created a startup that now does all kinds of data and support for training code gen models. And so they're off to the races. They basically went from 0 to almost 8 figures in about 9 months.
Oh, wow.
I think the interesting thing about, both the shape of startups and what the opportunities are changing really radically. I mean, the market for code gen data for large language models was zero even 2 years ago, because you didn't know that that was going to be something that people actually want to do. It's interesting in that the key insight is probably more important than ever. And it's, usually lying in your own history or in your own backyard.
Someone who once worked on an AI voice assistant for biologists and has never stepped foot in a biology lab, I deeply, the things that sound like they make sense, in fact, but like aren't kind of personally native or unique, end up sounding like, what does PG call them? Like sitcom startup ideas? Those sort of things, yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think Jared calls it, the hackathon startup ideas.
Yes.
Like, you're at a hackathon, I need to hack something, and, but where the rubber hits the road is you actually go and talk to people and show them the demo. And, if 10 people out of 10 people say, you know what, this isn't what I want, maybe it's time to pivot. Maybe 100, sometimes 100 people.
So these startups that go from, 0 to 8 figures in under a year, what advice do you have them for company building? Because they're on this, super fast treadmill on that piece too. So they have a product people want. You probably feel like they can't get it out to the market fast enough. And yet they also have this, company now that they're trying to build at the same time. Like, what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is sort of surprising about this era of startups is I think that blitzscaling might be dead. Maybe 8-9 years ago, the type of startup that was happening, it was the Airbnbs and DoorDashes and the marketplaces of the world. And in that moment, like, it was so new. It was actually pretty resource intensive. You had, often you were scaling across 50 geographies at once or something.
Yeah.
So it actually made sense. Like, you kind of need a 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 person team for that. In those sort of scenarios, capital became a bludgeon. Like, the more money you had, the more you could scale, you could make the graph go up like that. And so, I think that there's an entire era of startups where trying to become a unicorn and trying to be blessed by sort of this tiny group of maybe like 10 or 15 different pre-IPO names, late stage venture funds, they're our friends now. But, on the other hand, like, actually, that's just the popularity contest, right? As Buffett and Munger say. All these businesses are popularity contests, but in the long run, they have to be weighing machines. Like, do we have gross margin? What's our retention? What's going to happen to the dynamics of these businesses? So that's probably the biggest change, actually. There's a company called Salient that is growing super fast, one of our favorite companies right now. And I think they have 6 people. They got to 8 figures in annualized revenue, super high retention, vertical AI, and seemingly on track to be a giant company. But they're going to be able to get there without having 5,000 people. They might be able to do it with 20 or 30 people. And so, and we saw this before. I mean, WhatsApp I think was what, 30 some people.
Yeah.
Instagram never grew that big.
I think it was like 12 or 13. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're a founder, I think it's sort of the golden age.
I was going to say, and do you see founders who like that you can do this with fewer people, or do you still see founders that are like, oh, a part of how I think about my success is I go and I say my company has 2,000 people who work at it. And, that's kind of a popularity contest metric.
I think it's a little bit of a relief, actually. And I think it'll change the nature of the firms themselves. The thing that I think is happening with knowledge work is that there are lots and lots of jobs that are actually awesome jobs. And then there are also a great many jobs that are rote and they're sort of repetitive. Do you know the meme in Rick and Morty?
No.
Where, Rick's this mad genius scientist and he has a little robot on his table and, the robot goes up to him and says, Rick, what is my purpose? And Rick says, you pass butter. And the robot says, oh my God. And, I think that there is the equivalent of that, frankly, in knowledge work, that people shouldn't be in rote jobs that are not fun. That's my hope, is that I think the classic example here is Milton Friedman was in Panama looking at a bunch of people using shovels. He was like, well, why are they using shovels instead of heavy machinery? And the government person replied, well, it's sort of a jobs program. And Milton Friedman replied, well, if you want it to be a jobs program, you should give them spoons. And so when I really look at knowledge work, like I think that that's one of the most powerful mental models for how this is going to change. And what that hopefully means is basically there will be better jobs. The firms will be more profitable. That means they can actually invest into more things that solve more problems. Basically, that's how we create more abundance for everyone.
And related, in a lot of your recent talks and kind of writing online, you've talked about high agency individuals. What does that mean? Like, what do you kind of, any specifics, any examples?
Yeah, I mean, I remember working with Brian Armstrong at Coinbase, and he was always had the clear intelligence. He was very, very logical, and some of it was like, just a matter of experience. Like I remember being a CEO coach right when he graduated from YC. He was just learning how do I manage people? How do I hire engineers? How do I fire my first person? I think there's a misconception that agency is sort of this thing that you're sort of born with. And what we've seen at YC over and over again is that it's actually little changes day by day, and it sort of happens progressively as you actually build the company. And as bad things happen, you must overcome them. You certainly can. You have the resources, you have the network, you have the intelligence to do it. So I think that like high agency is something that can be learned and is learned quite frequently. And so today, if you meet Brian Armstrong, you're like, this person is so formidable. Like, he was attacked by the SEC of all places, like a government agency. And instead of folding and saying, oh no, what do? I better, shut down, or, we're going to give up crypto for all time. Like he said, you know what, we're going to fight it, and we're going to talk to lawyers, we're going to lobby, we're going to figure out how to do this. And I think just today, like the SEC came back and said, you know what, we're dropping the charges against Coinbase. And so I think that those are all really powerful moments. It's like basically you go out there and the universe will smack you. And then what do? Like you can take it and you can lie down, or you can get up and you can be like water. How do I move around this challenge, and how do I figure this out? It's requires will, but also can be learned.
Kind of some of my experience, or kind of the, bad things happen not infrequently at Vanta, but each kind of bad, and we'd overstate it, but each bad thing that happens is nowhere near as bad as stuff that's happened in the past. From the outside, it might look bad, but the inside, you're like, well, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, totally. So I think that that's extra important now, in that, people are really worried about AI. They're worried about where all the jobs going to go. And some of the things that we talk about is a lot of us have kids, and we're like, how do we actually teach our kids? And then I guess the two things that are most important when intelligence on tap is available is actually agency and taste, right? And then agency is just literally you can do things. And that, what's funny is that maps to how the technology works, right? Like agency is the prompting. The funniest thing that I've been, we talked with lots of AI researchers, and one of the things that they mention is, well, it sort of seems like AI is like, it's not that agentic yet. It sort of resembles a hyper-intelligent toaster. And for me, I'm like, that's great. Let's keep it that way. That would be great. Like if, this is the best possible scenario, because I want as much agency in human beings as possible. And then the second part that clearly, hasn't been solved yet, it's not clear to me it can be solved, is taste. And then that maps to evals, right? If you're using a large language model, being able to do evaluations of what models and what prompts are good, does it actually work for all these scenarios? Like that's actually turning out to be the moat for many startups. So I don't know. I mean, agency and taste are super, super important, and humans are going to be a really irreplaceable piece of that, I think.
And that taste piece, like you've for a decade plus been like a really outspoken advocate of design. How do you advise startups now to think about taste?
The great thing, or the challenging thing, is you can't just be, a technical co-founder and just ignore all of that. You actually, what we find now, especially in the age of prompting and vibe coding, is that everyone's a PM now. Like, you actually have to understand the product. The most important part of design, I think, is actually the empathy for the user. Like, you sort of have to be like an ethnographer. You're going in and seeing, what is this person like? What are their goals? What are their motivations? If you're selling enterprise software, the most important question is, how do they get promoted?
Yep.
And so if you can actually do all of those things, load it into your head, whether it's having actually lived that life or being able to be around people all the time who live that life, only then can you design something that is appreciably 10x better than the thing that they were doing before.
Kind of to that, I know YC's been at least public about advising founders or would-be founders to like go work in a call center, go, do some of this.
Yeah, go
to, like,
undercover.
Go undercover to like develop that empathy. Are folks taking you up on that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there was a company recently. I mean, this is one of the cool things about open source large language models. We had a medical billing company where one of the co-founders went and got a job as a medical biller on Zoom. And, they were able to write software and write prompts and like deeply understand what is it that a medical biller does.
Yep.
They did it in a way that didn't violate anything because none of the data. It's sort of like they were just doing the job, and instead of them using their wetware to do the job, they were writing software locally using I think the latest version of Meta's Llama. And so I think that was an incredible example. Obviously, the best way is to deeply understand someone's problem or a space and go in and, totally above board understand things. But sometimes you might not need to do that. You could go undercover and just do that job directly and then deeply understand it. And, from an IP perspective, you probably have to throw out the prompts and any code you write. But even doing that puts you ahead of absolutely everyone else who might be trying to do it. Like, can you imagine the alternative? It would be if you don't know a medical biller, you'd have to go and hang out in Starbucks or something and wait for a medical biller to show up. Like, what would you do to understand that job as intimately as actually doing the job?
Yep. Yeah. I think we will probably see a lot of more people come from like outside of an industry, outside of a subject domain, and then succeed. Whereas that's been like more rare in startup founders. Not unheard of, but just more rare in the last 10 years.
I think that might be actually more and more common. People are a little bit worried right now for software engineering or computer science graduates, especially. And then the funniest thing that I think I would do if I were in that situation is actually, I'd get my computer science degree. I'd get really good with Cursor or Windsurf or Continue or any of the coding platforms that use AI. And then I might go get a knowledge work job and just intimately understand, what is that job? How do I get promoted?
Right.
What does my boss care about? What does that business care about?
Yep.
And then, if you combine your intense ability to vibe code with like your intense understanding of this thing that
tractor sales in
tractor
Iowa.
sales. Yeah, exactly, right. Yep. My favorite story is Ryan Peterson, our friend. He and his brother were actually some of the biggest importers of medical hot tubs from China.
I remember hearing this. It's such a good story.
That and apparently e-bikes. Even before e-bikes were big.
But like 2013, when we needed more e-bikes.
And then that's through that they learned about bills of lading and global logistics. And so, of course, now Flexport exists.
Yes. Do you think AI will make it easier or harder for YC to pick startups and pick founders?
Oh, I mean, some of it is I hope it makes it easier, but, I ask me again in 10 years. So the outcomes take so long to figure out, what's going on. But I'm super bullish on the technology. And if anything, I think that that's part of what has been true about Y Combinator for we're coming on 20 years. I remember Paul would always say, before YC, you could basically get a job or go to grad school. And what he always wanted YC to be was something where you had a chance to instead go and start a startup. And then inherent to that is actually a very optimistic view, I think, that there aren't, limitations on the number of startups that could exist. And I think all of that stuff is a good thing. Like earlier we were saying, like instead of the 5,000 person startup, like you're going to have the 10 or 20 person startup. And then the sort of dystopian version of that is believing, well, that means that where are all the other jobs, or what are these other people going to do?
Right.
There's an alternative view, which is sort of Coase's theorem for the optimal size of a firm.
Yeah.
And so what might happen, which I deeply hope, is that, and I think you're already seeing it even within the Y Combinator community, like the YC startups end up using each other's software and they end up being best of breed software. Vanta is a great example of that, right?
Yeah.
Like you just obviated the need for every YC company to have a compliance department, actually, which is awesome.
Yep.
So instead of having these giant companies and, sort of full of butter passing jobs, and then not enough companies actually addressing all the different needs that all the different types of companies, might have, you could actually have thousands of flowers bloom. You should have thousands of companies making $1 billion a year in annualized revenue or more.
Yep.
And so this is actually a radically different view of how tech could come out into the world than what we have today. We have 7 companies worth $1 trillion. And we have many friends, not to take away what they do, like they're incredible operations. They're pushing forward the state of the global economy. I mean, all of our parents' retirement savings are probably all saved up in that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you could argue that some of these big companies are basically daycares for high IQ people. Are they really solving the problems, or are they coming in and, writing a spec for a check mark in, the settings pane of a thing that everyone uses, but, it's just,
And it will ship in maybe 24 months. Yeah.
Are we slowing down the rate of innovation? Probably.
Yep.
I mean, if you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who are in like sort of cushy daycares where they're not actually creating products or services that solve people's problems, that means that there are thousands, maybe tens of thousands of products and services that could exist that would solve problems faster. And certainly the world is full of problems.
Yep.
It's actually a very subtle, like kind of academic argument, like the optimal size of a firm should come down. But what that results in is hopefully much more connection between labor and the actual fruits of that labor, right? And that's what I want, right?
Higher marginal product of labor.
Exactly.
But actually.
Right. But actually, like we don't want people to have fake laptop jobs.
Right.
We want people to have real jobs that actually, someone on the other end is like, that saved my life, or that allowed me to spend more time with my kids, or like these sort of real things in our economy and in our lives. And then the final point would be like, I think if we do that, we're not going to have, or maybe we still have the 7 trillion-dollar companies, but we also have alternatives, right? Like everyone's worried about, big tech has so much say over our lives. And that would be my pitch to you for little tech. Like we should have lots and lots of little tech. And, it's the equivalent of, small business, but with the scale of AI and software.
Yep. It'd be interesting to look at of like the companies 2, 5, 10 years out of YC in different batches. Are they getting smaller over time?
Oh yeah.
Like it seems like it'll almost certainly, or looks like it'll be true now. I don't know if it was as true 5 years ago, but like the 2020 batch versus the 2010 batch.
Yeah. Oh, the batch sizes have definitely come down.
Yeah.
But,
I just mean like how many people those companies employ on average.
Yes. We should track this.
Is the firm size shrinking? Over time?
We should track this. I mean, I would say almost certainly now.
Yep.
I mean, going back to the example of people just graduating, the company that gets to $12 million ARR, I think what you would do 8 or 10 years ago is raise your splashy Series A, and then like 6 months later, raise your splashy Series B, and then hire your, customer success, customer support, like you hire your executive base. And then I think what we're starting to see is instead of doing that, you're hiring more cracked vibe coders. And then instead of hiring an entire team of like 1,000 people just to do that one function, you're trying to actually use the intelligence on tap, basically deliver a lot more with a lot fewer people.
Right. And like the intelligence is doing, a bunch of the old work. There's still people doing the edge cases or the evals to train all of this.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you started Initialized and ran it and then decided to come back to YC. What's something you can do at YC that you couldn't do at Initialized?
Oh, I mean, I'm super thankful for Initialized and the team I got to build there, and they're doing awesome. What I realize is, Initialized and a lot of our friends in venture, when I was Initialized, we were the beneficiaries of Y Combinator's sort of tree of prosperity. And so when Paul and Jessica came and asked me to come back, I realized, I'm needed at the tree of prosperity. So, and I deeply believe that what we're doing here, what we hope is to like make these thousands of startups that maybe wouldn't have existed without YC. We want them to exist, and we want them to both create jobs and solve problems. And so we want way fewer people to just like blindly join a big tech company and play volleyball all day and work on a checkbox in a settings pane. Like we want them to go and create companies that actually are of great value. And the wild thing is like it's more possible now than ever. And that's great. Like maybe this is, I don't know, is this too controversial? You can decide whether you want to keep it. There's sort of this very deep invective against tech and tech billionaires. And, I even get attacked for it in San Francisco. People accuse me of being a billionaire. I am not. I've gone on record that I'm not yet a billionaire. I'm not a billionaire. If anything, I feel like our job at Y Combinator is to help people become billionaires, certainly. And that, we should make that much more accessible. I think what's more valuable even than that is actually to create companies that are actually of great value and that actually create really great jobs. And I think in aggregate, we're, instead of thinking, oh no, there's not going to be 5,000 jobs, we should have like thousands of these companies all employing 30, 50, 100 people. And they're like, each job is actually really awesome. Like you're sitting there and operating at like the limits of what you're capable of. And like, to me, that's, the flow state actually. And I think that if you poll, 100 founders and people who work at startups and 100 people who work in big companies, period, the people who say they're in flow state, I mean, what do you think that percentage is at a big company versus at a startup?
So much higher at the startup.
I mean, it's like
uncountably
higher. Is it like
1%
versus maybe 50 or 80% for like really great places, right? And so in my head, like that's the world that we want to actually build. And I think Y Combinator is uniquely the place where that could happen.
Kind of building off of that, so controversial to some, maybe not outside this neighborhood, that more billionaires, more really successful companies is a net positive. Why is it something you believe in so strongly?
I guess we see it. We have, dozens of friends, and hundreds of people in our community have actually gone from this state of having never started a company before, sometimes never having managed a person before, to now like employing hundreds of people, having thousands, tens of thousands of customers who come back and rely on your service every single day. There's nothing more gratifying than seeing something, go from 0 to 1 and 1 to billions, right? And so at some level, like we're witness to that, right? And then I recognize it's like, that's not a normal thing, right? People hear this story and they're like, doesn't seem real. How is that possible?
Right. If you think of the advice you've given startup founders over the years, maybe skewed more recently, but like is there some framework or kind of tool that you keep coming back to, keeps being important?
I just think about the T-shirt that we give people on the first day of YC. It's just make something people want. And then embedded in that is just like, it's a mantra, honestly. It's like it's a holy phrase, you know? And almost any problem can be solved by that set of things, because maybe you're not making something, maybe it's not something people want. Maybe you're not doing it fast enough. I mean, maybe they're just, make something people want now, like that's sort of.
Such a good phrase.
Yeah, you sort of really need that. Almost all the problems that people run into are sort of related to that ultimately.
You work with first-time founders, second-time founders, sometimes third-time founders. What's something that second or third-time founders actually don't get that first-timers do more easily?
I think the main thing is just the schlep blindness. The amazing thing about first-time founders is they just have no biases. And actually, that's sometimes very necessary, right? a good example might be, this idea of vibe coding. If you've been coding for 20 years at this point and you hear about this, like the initial reaction is like, this couldn't possibly be real until you try it. And then you're like, wow, this is actually wild. Yeah. The best thing that second and third timers can do is use their network, use their, sort of ability to gather capital and all the people they could possibly hire. But then when it comes to actually running the business, they have to do beginner's mind again.
To make something people
hard.
want.
Yeah, and that's very, very hard.
And so that's the advantage the first time people have. Is that
the beginner's mind is, well, you just start off with like totally no biases.
And then the second time it's the network, the access to capital,
Yeah, and you have to pick a schlep to be blind to, I guess.
Right. And you know all the hard, or you know what the hard parts could be.
But then you're going to do it anyway.
Yep, that makes sense. The other mantra that YC is really known for is the do things that don't scale. Right? Airbnb, great example of the to grow that 10%, going to New York, taking really nice photos of people's homes so then they get booked more. Any other really like fantastic but less known do things that don't scale examples?
I think it just happens like sort of day to day in the batch, actually. What's a good example? I mean, basically, whenever you find yourself saying, in order to do X, like in order to ship, I need to do it with these checkboxes. Do things that don't scale basically say, you know what, there's an external dependency, you're waiting on getting it to be perfect. You're waiting on like some process to be able to support scale. But, that is a 1 to a billion phenomenon. And then going from 0 to 1 is actually about just getting to 1. Like if you need to build a lot of software or hire all these people or hire a Mechanical Turk or do any of these things, like just do it later. That first time you do it, you can do it, or your team can do it, or you can figure out a way to do it in a totally unscalable way. And then it unlocks you from the 10,000 reasons why you can't do X, Y, or Z.
How do you know when you've hit 1 and not 0 to 1?
I guess when the product is probably getting pulled out of you. I mean, when your servers are on fire, you know this feeling.
Yeah, it is funny because it is pulled out of you, but I don't know how to explain it in some ways more than that.
Yeah, I mean, what I've heard, many YC and non-YC founders, I think founders, period, who have experienced, I think they describe it as like you're sitting with a customer and they give you 10 pages of notes on the things that they want. And it's like, oh yeah, that's not being nice.
Right.
Being nice is like, oh yeah, it looks useful. I'm going to send it to my friend.
Exactly.
And then product market fit looks like, oh yeah, this is awesome, but it would be even more awesome if you did X, Y, and Z.
Yep. Going back to AI, if you were king of all AI regulations around the world, what would they look like?
Oh, that's a good question. I was in DC. I met French Hill, who's a congressman who's really quite a leader on crypto regulation and fintech. What I suspect will end up happening, going back to our discussion about agency, the nightmare scenario I think all of us share at some level is we don't want to be all below some sort of API line. Like if you just take all of knowledge work and you turn it into like driving for Uber, I think, everyone might be like pretty worried that that would happen. And then what they do in fintech and financial regulation is that, for instance, for approvals, they require a human in the loop. And so I would suspect, and this is a wild guess, but in 3, 5, 10 years, what you're going to find is that the intelligence gets smarter and smarter. And then there will be ultimately like all the things that you can do today are still governed by laws that, apply to corporations and people. And then the subtlety here is that, there might be a moment where someone wants to put an AI in as CEO. And like, what might that even look like? And that's, in that crazy future, it wouldn't surprise me if the government or some entity came in and said, and this might be very different in different places, right? A China versus a US versus Europe are going to all approach these things in very different ways. But it would not surprise me if human in the loop type regulation that is already established in financial technology regulation comes over to technology broadly. And I think that might be a good thing. We want human beings to be, hand on the wheel and held to account. And as long as that can happen, what you don't want is the scenario where it's like, oh yeah, Wintermute, the AI did that, and how do you make that accountable? Like you can't make sort of an infinitely smart toaster accountable. Ultimately, the buck has to stop somewhere, and it probably has to stop with people with their hand on the wheel.
There's also a lot of talk around open source AI. And is it kind of safer or is it more dangerous? YC backs a lot of open source AI. Do you have strong thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, maybe a year or 2 years ago, we were a little bit worried that only 1 or 2 players would end up with this frontier AI, and somehow there'd be takeoff, and you'd be in some sort of Windows, monopoly scenario, or
the latest Mission Impossible movie, if you saw that.
Yeah, exactly right. And what I'm really excited about, as of today, it feels like there may be 8 or 9 players, all of whom are, competing in a fair way that is actually awesome. That gives all of our startups a lot of choice. And so I'm like pretty white-pilled at the moment and a lot of that you can really directly trace to open source, right? If you are stuck with lock-in on certain platforms through closed APIs and closed source, then you know what? Like you can charge monopoly rents, you can do whatever you want, you can self-preference, you can do all these things, and power will just accrue to the next great big tech company. There will be, a new company worth $1 trillion. And, while that's not a bad thing inherently, like I think a much better version of that would be a lot more choice with a lot more companies, with a lot more prosperity spread out and, smaller firm size.
You built a popular YouTube channel. What's something kind of non-obvious or people wouldn't expect that you've learned about being a creator?
I guess I remember meeting Casey Neistat, who's sort of like one of the original creators. What made me think maybe I should do this is, I had watched a lot of his videos, but seeing my interns interact with him was like a very interesting thing, because it felt like he walked in and they just started talking to him like he was an old friend, and then he just reciprocated. So that was probably the most interesting thing that I think you should be prepared for.
Do people come up to you now and, feel they know you?
Yeah. And then at YC, my stated goal is, we actually have 13 partners, and, rather than one person being, sort of the figurehead person, like I actually want all 13 people to be like Paul Graham, right? Yeah. And then it's starting to happen to a bunch of them now. Like, people stop Diana Hu in the street, and she has her Diana stands in the comments, which is awesome. So great. On the one hand, like, I think there's a general critique about like parasocial relationships and is that good or not? But at this point, I think it's actually probably good. Like, I think if you can influence people, if you're helping them, if you're telling very authentic, sort of real stories about yourself, that's powerful, right? And I think it's in deep demand, right? The classic thing for VC content was always, I'm killing it, we're killing it. Right. And then you look at those channels and it's like, oh yeah, 50 views, 100 views. And then when I started doing YouTube, my most viral things were actually about my most horrible mistakes. Like my first viral video was called My $200 Million Mistake, which was when I turned down co-founding Palantir. And the hilarious thing is... It's even more expensive today. It's my $2.6 billion mistake.
There we go.
Yeah, I need to do a V2.
There's been inflation, but not that much.
That's right, yeah. So yeah, being vulnerable, being real, and just, I mean, that's probably the most important thing for, be a creator to like uniquely tell your story and the story of people you find interesting, and don't do it for any other reason. And I think like anyone who does that will have an audience and do really well.
And you've built one that way.
Trying to,
So actually, if we took all that Garry Tan content that makes people feel like they really know you and fed it to an LLM, what would the LLM not know about you?
I think the hardest part about success ultimately is learning to say no, and like, basically, the Harvard longitudinal study of happiness. I think in the moment when you are in, feel like you're in a powerful position and notoriety and power and all of these things, sometimes I have to remind myself of that study because it seems pretty clear that, even after the YouTube channel is over, or even after all the investments are done and dusted, and you return the money to your LPs, or even after
You're
whatever,
in the Hall of
after
Fame
the IPO,
of people who return money to LPs, right?
it's like you're still a human being. You still have your family. You still have your friends.
Yep.
And I think I had read about this, right? Like when you're younger, you're like, oh yeah, like people lose their minds from money, power, and fame all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to let that happen to me. And then it's just interesting to see, it's actually so hard to remind yourself of that and then also do the right things. Like you get this email out of the blue and it's like, well, do I take, do I go to my 9-year-old's baseball practice, or do I take this meeting? And it's this really big meeting. What do you do? Right. And actually you have to carve out parts of your life because
the baseball practices, even though it seems like there's infinity of them, there's not.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think I'm most surprised by that, and it's something that me and my friends who are parents, everyone has really crazy careers, and it's just so hard. I don't know. I didn't really expect that.
Yep. The version of that, or there's people around me who deeply care about Vanta's success, but also they don't. And it's not in at all malicious way, just that's not how they, think about me at all. Or they want it to be successful because I want it to be successful.
Totally. When you're presented in the moment, you want it to have it all. And actually you just have to choose, and you're going to, what nobody says is that actually it will hurt you on one side, but the other part is priceless. So, the decision should just be made, and you should live with it. It's, there's not really another way.
I have 4 rapid fire questions.
Oh, yeah, let's do it.
Okay. What are you reading right now?
Oh, gosh. I'm spending a lot of time with OpenAI deep research lately. So it's
you need good prompting tips for that.
The funniest thing is sometimes I go into O3 mini high. I tell it who I am and why I care about a thing, and then I ask the question, and then I ask it to prompt deep research, and then it actually does work very well.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. I'll try that.
Yeah. It's like having an assistant for your assistant.
Exactly. Great at getting coffee tasks.
Yeah.
If you could take a first-time founder on a one-day tour of the Bay Area, where would you go?
Oh, man. Let's see. My favorite place to eat is probably Swan Oyster Depot. Yeah, that's probably my jam. I think a shrimp and crab Louis salad there is the best thing to eat in the world.
Hardest you have laughed during a YC batch?
I remember my first stint of YC, Kevin Hale was always the trooper, and someone came in with a sleep device that would measure how your sleep went, which is, super reasonable idea. But it was a really crazy prototype because the next morning we came in and Kevin had a red mark on his forehead that he had to have all day. I think it took a week to go away because it was a hardware prototype and they hadn't tested it. And it was too hot, and it actually left this sort of light burn mark on his forehead. So anyway, we've become much more careful about trying other people's hardware contraptions since.
They say YC partners in a arduous job.
Yeah. Talk about putting your body on the line.
Exactly. Something that seemed like a really big deal to you at the time, and in retrospect, that was fine.
I always remember because we have to coach people through their first time letting someone go all the time. I always think about that. It's the thing that's probably most surprising about organizations, period, is that nobody likes to do it. It's so unpleasant. If you like doing it, you're probably a sociopath, and all of that is true. And then simultaneously, people hate doing it so much that I think entire organizations become sclerotic and a mess and have bad culture, actually because they just don't let go people who obviously they should. It's just surprising, and I think it's everywhere. And so we're always just coaching people it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And tomorrow will be fine. And actually, the thing that I think is most surprising to people is like we'll walk them through it and then we'll tell them after you do it, you will feel so relieved. And then afterwards, of course, every time they're like, you were right. Like, I didn't expect that. I thought it was going to be terrible after. And instead, it got so much better. And yet it just happens all the time. And, you know, we all do it.
Yeah, I was going to say, what sort of coaching works? You can like, it sounds like you're like talking someone through, here's what you're going to feel along the way. But like, what works for a founder?
I think the biggest thing is just being resolute, right? Like, it's such an unpleasant thing to do that, you know, halfways it's like, oh, maybe we should let them stay. Oh, maybe we'll change your role. And it's like, my advice is just write it down. Like, you know, if you have to read from it, you're better off just being resolute. Like, this decision has been made. And then immediately try to figure out, like, how can we be helpful? Like, what's the next thing for you? Like, helping people focus on the future and, like, genuinely caring about what happens to them after is, like, sort of the basic thing to do. And, you know, once you do that, actually, honestly, like, I think it's like setting people free in some way. Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's seen this before. It's like, oh, this was so not working. And now they can actually go and find the thing that, you know, allows them to enter the state of flow. And that's what I think everyone deserves.
Yeah. Yeah, it very much resonates. I think for me, it feels the worst right before you do it, not right after.
Yeah.
Which is intuitive. And however bad, like, I feel, the other person probably feels worse, and that is the thing to focus on, not how I feel, you know?
That's very true.
Right. So it doesn't sort of matter how I feel. I'll be fine. We'll both be fine, but...
Yeah. Not only is it something that people really try to avoid, but it's also really important for people to learn how to say goodbye in a way that respects the people who are moving on. Because ultimately, especially for startups that are starting out, you really want to become a place where it is a great place to be from. You know, you want other people to say, oh, they came from that company, they must be really great. And the only way that can happen is from having and learning to have good and gracious goodbyes.
It's a really good way to put it. Thank you so much. That was the end of my questions, but I so appreciate the time you spent with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's such an honor to be one of the first guests.